Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Can you hear me? In the back? Okay, great. Thanks. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Noah Raford. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and the Futurist in Chief for an organization which I'll share a little bit about right now called the Dubai Future Foundation. And on behalf of our Managing Director, His Excellency Mohammed Al-Gargawi, the Minister of Cabinet Affairs and Managing Director of the Future Foundation, His Excellency Omar Al-Awama, the Minister of Artificial Intelligence and our Deputy Managing Director, and His Excellency Khalfan Bahul, our CEO, I'd like to thank you for having us. It gives me the chance to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the way to use cities as experimental test beds for the kinds of industries and issues and opportunities that tomorrow provides. But before we do that, I'd like to ask you to imagine a world where we have 100% fully automation. So all of the dangerous, dull, and dirty jobs that are traditionally done by low-paid laborers, by low-paid or low-motivated office staff, are done by a combination of robots, artificially intelligent software machines, and virtual agents. Our physical world is comprised of goods that are made digitally in collaboration with crowds of specialists and artificially intelligent designers, fabricated locally on the spot just for you in a way which has no waste, might be specifically designed to the things that make you happy or of your interest, and no longer subject to these massive, large-scale industrial supply chains that take thousands and thousands of miles and subjugate people for millions of miles around the world. Our cars are fully autonomous. Our roads are driven everywhere by self-driving cars. Road deaths are a thing of the past. Congestion, pollution, all of these things are a thing of the past. We spend less time in cars driving from point A to point B. We spend less time trying to figure out what we're going to do with our day in terms of mobility schedules, and we actually just enjoy the things that we want to do with our time. And our buildings are built by self-building building systems. Our infrastructure, our materials, fully automated and fully maintained. So what do we do with all this time? Of course, education will be free in this world, delivered to everyone, regardless of where you are, if you're a village in India or if you're in a large-scale city in the West, delivered by a combination of artificially intelligent tutors like Khan Academy, specifically targeted to you, your interests, your learning styles, and done at such a low cost that anyone in the world has access to the world's best education. AI, synthetic biology, 3D printing pill printers, all of these things develop and deliver healthcare to anyone for free, available to everyone, and our entire energy system is 100% green and renewable. So what do we do with all of this, right? We spend the gains of our productivity doing the things that humans do best. We work less, we spend more time with our families, we focus on our friends, we develop the kind of voluntary and collective activities that really make life worth living. Be that investments in arts, or science, or parties, or education, whatever that might look like. And we have a social support system that provides a universal basic income for everyone. So your value as a human being is not derived from how much you can sell your time to someone more powerful than you, but is derived from your fundamental right as a person in this 21st century world to have access to the goods, foods, services, transportation, et cetera, that the benefits of technology provides. And then we can derive our social value through our exchanges of other kinds of things, the things that matter most to human beings. So let's get back to today, though. So unfortunately, we live in a world where companies mostly make dirty money, selling dirty products with dirty power. We are at the beginning of what most climate scientists agree to be runaway irreversible climate change. I don't know if you remember back in the mid-90s or so, there was a figure floating around called about 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And the fear in the early 90s was if we reached 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, then we would face irreversible catastrophic climate change. Well, the bad news is that we crossed that threshold last year. So no matter if we stopped emitting all CO2 right now, we're still locked in to dramatic, potentially catastrophic climate change within our lifetimes. So the fight against climate change is lost, and our entire lives are going to be spent dealing with the impacts of that. And that's going to affect everything from food to water to migration to state stability. That's going to fundamentally transform the world that we're in, offering kinds of challenges which we really have only just started to see the beginning of. We also have a social situation where there's a tremendous gap between the very wealthy and the very poor, the people who have benefited from the last 100 years of industrialization and globalization, and those who haven't. And this is producing very rightfully felt anger, frustration, and protest that's manifesting itself in populist movements around the world and a sense of frustration with the elites that have developed us to the point that we're in. So we have this world of tomorrow, this extraordinary potential, the technology, new ways of doing business, new ways of organizing our societies, new ways of valuing each other and our time enables. And we have the world of today, which is not exactly set up to handle that, and is facing fundamental stresses and strains, which are, without being really dramatic, existential threats. So how do we get from here to there? Right? Assuming that some version of this vision, which I shared with you at the beginning, is desirable, like who doesn't want to spend more time with their friends? Who doesn't want to spend more time practicing their music, or learning to become a better cook, or writing that book you always wanted to write, or becoming a ballet dancer, or whatever that might look like? We all do, right? So how can we get from here to there? The traditional answer, usually in today's society, is startups. Startups will save us. And I don't mean to in any way disparage Juicero or any of these sort of very disparageable Silicon Valley startups. But the real question here is, well, what about government? Because what we're talking about here is not just consumer innovation, not just another app which will enable you to get your groceries delivered with a 6 seconds less or 5 seconds more convenience, or another recommendation engine to buy more things that you might not have realized you actually wanted and you most certainly do not need. But we're talking about the fundamentally heavily regulated things upon which society rests. Education, healthcare, infrastructure, security, mobility, all of the things which traditionally are massively government-led, if not actually regulated. So what about government, right? What role does government have to play in this civilizational transformation? The traditional experience of most people is that government and government officials are boring and ineffective. And this has led to a narrative, certainly in parts of the West, where the best thing to do to create innovation is to get government out of the way. And this is a stereotype, unfortunately, because it's true in many, many places around the world. But if we rewind history a little bit here, the greatest myth of the 20th century is that Silicon Valley is the source of all innovation, and this just emerged whole cloth from the minds of venture capitalists without any support. Now, that's actually not the case. Historically, Silicon Valley benefited from over 50 years of massive federal investment in R&D, commercialization of technologies, technology transfer between the public sector and the private sector. My favorite example of this is the iPhone. So every single technology in the iPhone was invented for or by the government. Everything from the internet itself, to hard drives, to memory, to GPS, to touch screens, to the first generation microprocessors. All of these things were done with massive federal support, often in federal research labs, in combination with universities, and then through programs of technology transfer, licensed to the private sector, such that someone like Steve Jobs could come together and put together a package that produced this iPhone. So we think of Steve Jobs and Apple as the iconic innovator, but in fact, he was, as Newton said, standing on the shoulder of giants. This was on the back of 50 years of massive investment, which produced these fundamental transition technologies. Let me give you one more example. So let's take drugs. The National Institute of Health in the United States is responsible for 75% of all breakthrough drugs, drugs that make over $1 billion in the market or more. And those are licensed to the massive pharmaceutical companies who then take these to market and reap the commercial rewards. So when it comes to the kinds of in-depth, hardcore, transitional research about moving from one kind of economic system to the other, from one kind of energy production to the other, really government has always played a fundamental role, and this actually pays back in the long run. So I don't know if you know this, but NASA has this great statistic. Every dollar you spend on space yields $40 of return in the real economy. So you think sometimes, wait, we can't be investing in this futuristic stuff, right? We actually have to make our economy work now. Well, this sort of future-oriented, mission-oriented innovation is the only way that economies actually grow over time. That's always been the case. From steam engines to the Industrial Revolution to roads to the early computers themselves, it's always fundamentally followed two main stages, from massive state support and government investment, followed by a crash, usually, as people get hyped up by the potential of this technology, rush in, like a tulip crisis, elevate the values of things. Turns out it's not quite ready. There's a financial crash, and it gets into the ability to actually deliver these real things over time as production capital. So this model, which has been called by some some economists like Mariana Mazzucato, the entrepreneurial state, is the model that we follow here in Dubai. It's the model that actually, when you're talking about civilizational scale transformation, the private sector is in no position to be able to actually take the risk on its shoulders to invest in the things that are going to take 20, 30 years to return. or for which there isn't a legal framework. And it can only be government that takes a visionary position to say, we think this is important for the good of us all, we think this is what the future is going to be like, and therefore we're going to take the stance to invest in these new ways of doing things. Particularly important now because, as I mentioned, we're at this moment in time where the 20th century is failing at an exponential rate. So all of the business models, all of the governance models, all the mental models, all the physical infrastructure, all the social agreements that have sustained us to this point are being put under such stress with such new challenges that they're literally unable to adapt and are collapsing all around us. In the same time, the 21st century is still being born. So all the little experiments which you've heard from Dr. Aisha and some of our colleagues, and you see in Wired magazine and you read on your WhatsApp, all of these things are suggesting seeds for how the world might become, how they might actually inform this future which I've described to you, but they're not quite ready yet. Right? There's no way that we're going to be able to, even let's take blockchain. Dubai is the sort of global leader in blockchain, but it still isn't production scale yet. We have about 12 more months until it has to get to production scale. But it's emerging. So we face at least 10 more years, and for those of you who are studying right now, so those are students in the room, or those of you who are considering a career change, our entire lives, let's call it at least the next decade, if not two, are going to be spent handling the death of the 20th century and all of the personal, emotional, social unrest that involves, while we're trying to midwife in the birth of the 21st century. And it's not going to be an easy process. I call this a transition decade because this is something that is going to be fundamentally contested. You see this in politics around the world right now. People who are looking for someone to blame, people who are looking for some sort of salvation or champion who's going to help bring it back to the way it used to be. And you see this in all sorts of little fringe experiments, mostly in people created by people who are not in this room. People who are like out in the desert doing bonkers festivals, and people who are in their labs in their garage in Delhi creating some new synthetic biology approach. These are the kinds of people that would probably never even be allowed access to these kinds of conferences because they're out there on the edge creating new solutions. And figuring out how those two worlds combine as we deal with the death of the 20th century in as compassionate and painless a way as possible, and then facilitate the birth of the 21st century in as rapid a way as possible, is the task of our decade. Right? This is the task of your professional lives going forward. For those of us in public office, our job is to facilitate this transition. So let's get to the point of the matter. What can cities do to help lead this transformation? Because if we don't, it's game over. Don't mean to be traumatic, but it really doesn't look good. Like my boss always jokes that we have two futures ahead of us in this region. It's Star Trek or Daesh. And that sort of puts things in stark contrast here. Because if you don't provide opportunities for people to meaningfully exert their efforts towards a sustained dream of a better world, then what are people going to do, right? You're going to get angry, you're going to look for someone to blame, and then you're going to start fighting. So this is our job in the Dubai Future Foundation. We work with most of the Dubai government entities, including many federal ministries and state-owned investment enterprises like Maras and Dubai Holding, Emirates Airlines, all of whom have fantastic individual innovation teams inside their own departments who are responsible for innovating in their sector. But what His Highness Sheikh Mohammed found was that there wasn't a body which was looking across sectors, over the horizon, so a little bit further time frame, and in the peripheral vision, the kind of people that talk to the weirdos in the desert and the guys in their garage, and the kind of people that go to those weird bespoke conferences behind closed doors talking about uncomfortable topics. And they're able to bring them back into these rooms and start to figure out, what does this mean for Dubai? What does this mean for the UAE? And we have the benefit of leadership here, which has undergone, as Dr. Aisha showed that great picture of 1991, has undergone repeated, rapid, catastrophic transformation. And in each stage of that transformation has been able to turn those crises into opportunities for Dubai and for the UAE. And there's this great quote from Sheikh Mohammed: "The future will not be as patient with us as the present." It's quite rare that we have national leaders who are so committed to transformation at a massive scale for the things that matter most for most people. This is a place that's always been full of big risks. When the country was founded, there were 42 college graduates in the entire country. Big enemies all around. Barely any natural resources. This was before oil had really been tapped, right? And we had to make some big risks to be able to survive. My favorite example of this is the Dubai airport. So for those of you guys who were around in 1885, that was a couple years before I was born, the airport in Dubai was served by Gulf Air, right? So Gulf Air was a regional conglomerate. About 80% of Dubai airport's traffic came from Gulf Air. And at the time, one day, Gulf Air came to the leadership here and said, guys, either you give us exclusive landing rights here, or khalas, we're pulling out in 3 days. You have 3 days to decide. So think about this. If you're a university and your students come to you and say, either you do this thing, you don't let any other students in, or 70% of us are leaving. Or you're a business person. Your biggest customer says, either you only do business with me or we're leaving. Right? Existential threat. And what His Highness did, he said, okay, he thought about it. So what are our values in Dubai? We're committed to open skies. We're committed to international trade. We're committed to providing a playing field where anyone can come and give it a shot. And so he went and, with a small capital investment, created Emirates Airlines. Bought a couple of planes from Pakistan, bought a couple of pilots and ground crew from Malaysia, and created what is now the world's best airline, which serves the entire globe and has integrated the UAE and Dubai into this global framework in such a way that has helped position it as one of the leading cities in the world. So our motto in the Dubai Future Foundation is this, super simple. See the future, imagine what that might be like, try to imagine the ways that it might benefit us all, that are exciting, that actually get people excited about it, right? That aren't PowerPoints, that aren't suits and ties in conference rooms, but that are deeply inspiring to most people. And then create the future. See the future, create the future. Because this starts with people's individual experience of change. Like if you talk to your mom, or you talk to your kids, or you talk to most people who are in this industry, and you start to talk to them about artificial intelligence, or automation, or blockchain, these are super nerdy, technical, terrifying terms. And when you start to then communicate a little bit more what this means, oh, we're going to have a fully automated society where all of our goods and services are going to be done by robots, this is a fundamentally terrifying prospect for most people. So when we're thinking about the future, it's natural for people who are undergoing these transitions to have two kind of very sane emotional reactions. The first is hope. I can see myself in that future. I can see the role that I might play. I can see the opportunities that provides, and therefore that gets me excited about it, and I'm willing to work for it. And the second is fear. And unfortunately, that's the far more common response when faced with transitions of any kind, personal, social, economic. And when you are motivated from a place of fear, you end up trying to find someone to blame. And this is what happens when you have, not to get too specific about it, right? But let's take the United States. The #1 job in most American states is truck driver. Right? There were 180 million miles driven by self-driving cars last year alone, and Tesla just introduced a self-driving truck. These guys are not stupid. Right? They see their way of life, their position in the community being eroded, and they don't know what role they have to play. Well, it turns out if you look at a map of the states in which truck drivers are the #1 jobs, and the states that voted for Donald Trump, they're a 1-to-1 correlation. Because this is someone who's promising a resistance to the future, right? Promising a salvation from this future for which you don't have any hope. And so our first thing in the Dubai Future Foundation, when we were talking about using cities as testbeds to create visions of tomorrow, is to try to create hopeful stories that everyone can experience. So I've been working in politics for quite a long time. The thing that I learned, probably the first, I've been working in the Dubai government for about 7 years. The first thing I learned was that nobody reads anything. And as a former management consultant, that was kind of a painful thing for me to come to realize. Like as an academic, I was like, wait, no one's reading my research? No one's looking at my PowerPoint slides? What's going on here? And it's not just this region. Actually, everyone in positions of leadership around the world is fundamentally under fire from so many urgent issues that you really don't have the time to absorb information in this form. So I had trained as a designer originally. I thought, how can we use 21st century tools like design, like modern media, like experience creation, to start to communicate how these things might change in the future and get people excited about an optimistic or hopeful vision of them? And that led to this. This is with the Museum of the Future. You probably have seen it right now. This is yesterday. It's under construction just in front of Emirates Towers. It opens end of 2019. And this whole vision started from a tiny little exhibition design, which we did at the World Government Summit about 6 years ago now, where we let people walk into this environment of the future, where you could touch these things. We worked with designers to say, okay, right, AI is this big idea, but what is that going to mean for my kids? What is that going to mean for my commute to work? What is that going to mean for my daily life? And so we create these experiences that people can understand and that are fundamentally reflecting the issues involved in them, the fundamental needs that we all have to relate to, with how these technologies come together in a very attractive, interactive, exciting way. And what we found was not only do people get excited about this, but they want what they see. Right? This generates demand. A good example of this is this School of the Future that we created. This is a very simple experience. This is just a digital sand table. It's about maybe twice as big as one of these tables. You pile sand up on the top, and little digital snow forms at the top of the sand, and you wave your hand, and digital water falls from your hand and pools in the valleys. You can dig a ditch, and the water flows through the ditches. Put a little block in, and it generates electricity, and little cities grow. And this is reflecting what we know works for kids, right? Kids work best when they get their hands dirty, literally, when they're working as groups, when they're having fun, when it's beautiful and engaging. What you don't see in this classroom are any teachers, any textbooks, any tests, right? And when we showed this to His Highness and to the former Minister of Education, he said, great, I get it. I'll take 300. I was like, oh, Your Excellency, I'm really sorry. This thing isn't real. This is a simulation. We just built this about what might be possible in the future. And he looked at me like I was an idiot, and he was like, build me 300 more of these. Like, what? I don't get it. You've got one. Let's do this. And in that moment, we realized that by creating these visions that were tangible and experiential, people wanted what they saw. And there was a potential there to build positive, concrete examples of how the world might change that actually create change in the world. So this gets to the second part of our vision, right? See the future, create the future. So we use these visions, inspiring people about what might be possible in a tangible, concrete, sexy, attractive, interactive way to get people excited, to open conversations in an informed way with the people that matter. And then we fulfill these demands, right? People want it. We say, okay, great. How can we start to make this real today? A good example of this is a 3D printed building, which you might have seen in front of Emirates Towers. It's the world's first and only fully functional 3D printed building still, and it's 2 years old, which blows my mind. We created a whole series of policy briefs around 3D printing, how it's going to transform the economy. Nobody cared. Then I 3D printed a gun, a plastic gun, famous plastic gun that caused a lot of scandal about 4 or 5 years ago, and brought it to a meeting with the minister. And he was like, what is this? Well, it's a gun. How did you get this through security? Well, exactly. That's the point. So we created an object that created an experience which demonstrated the value of this and immediately created the need of, well, what are we going to do about this? And in doing so, we created a group of industry specialists who came together, who had skin in the game. They were passionate about this topic. They wanted to do something to create the future. And they proposed this 3D printed building, which we then funded and supported. This is it coming in off the boat from China. The concrete was printed in China, being assembled here in front of Emirates Towers. The rest of the interior is fairly straightforward. I mean, sort of green construction, sustainability, and stuff. But when we opened it for His Highness, he said, great, you've built one. Where's the next 10,000? Right? And after the pain of putting these things together, I will spare you the drama of this project because it was quite difficult given that it was right under His Highness's nose in Emirates Towers, in between Emirates Towers and DIFC, probably the most visible parcel of real estate in the entire city, put together with a coalition of people who were aspirationally motivated, but let us say less than contractually obliged, and dealing with things that were actually fundamentally, at this point, illegal. Right? There was no law, there were no building permits for how to build a 3D printed building because Dubai municipality didn't have any laws for this. No one ever done this, right? So, I like to call this pre-legal. It's not illegal, it's just not legal yet. And this is an important takeaway because the only way we're able to transition from one way of doing things for which the laws, which are fundamentally retrospective and past-oriented, are based, right, is to do experiments which demonstrate the value of these things, get people politically excited about it, and then work with the industry stakeholders and the regulators to develop the rules which will enable this to occur. So when His Highness said, you've built one, that's great, where's my next 10,000? We thought, I can't go through that again. How are we going to enable this to operate at scale? So we worked with our partners at Dubai Municipality, and we created the Dubai 3D printing strategy, which commits 25% of every single building to be 3D printed in Dubai by 2030, starting next year. So starting next year, you won't be able to get a building permit for certain kinds of buildings in Dubai unless 2% of it is 3D printed or robotically constructed. And that target will increase 2% year on year on year until we hit this target. And this is really interesting because when we did this thing, we had literally over 1 billion hits, 1 billion page views when we opened this thing. And people were literally driving up in their G-Wagons, dripping with gold, like Indian contractors and billionaires from Russia, and coming and be like, this is great. I want to buy 100,000. Where do I get them? But we didn't actually have an infrastructure in place to do this. This was a labor of love/pain. And we didn't have a response. But after we got through the initial demand, we thought, okay, this is here. We're creating a market for this next generation technology, which no one in the world is doing. No one in the world thought this was even possible. And so as a result, companies started flocking to Dubai to try to create this, right? They tried to realize this. And now we have something like a dozen 3D printing companies at the architectural scale experimenting with very different ways, and we'll be making some interesting announcements at the end of May about what's next around that. Did the same thing with self-driving cars. It's a little video we did to help people imagine. It's called Remember Your First Ride in a Self-Driving Car. You call it Cream, you get in and you realize there's no one in the car. Like, what is the emotional experience like of doing something like that? And we used this video to develop the self-driving vehicle strategy with Road Transportation Authority and then launched similar target, right? 25% autonomous trips by 2030. And now they're doing extraordinary work developing this with different manufacturers around the world. Dr. Aisha already mentioned the work we did on the blockchain. And after you create these pilot projects, I guess the key thing I want to emphasize at that point is people are terrified about this stuff, particularly people in positions of responsibility and authority, because it's your neck on the line if this goes badly. So the way to successfully create these things that inspire people to change the laws and put their name on it is to just make it as interesting as possible, right? Make it bonkers science fiction. Make it super engaging. Make it hugely aspirational, and then deliver on 10% of that through a concrete example, or 1% of that in a concrete example. Because if you don't, you're never going to get this far. But thankfully, after having done many of these projects, we realized that, well, we can't support these. We can't continue to do prototypes at scale across here, and we need to start to support a larger marketplace around this stuff. So we launched several projects, which you may have heard of, including one of our flagship ones, the Dubai Future Accelerators, which Dr. Aisha mentioned, Dubai Economy is part of. Many key government entities in Dubai come together with us in Emirates Towers. We have this very interesting co-working space, set these huge challenges for themselves. Say, for example, your RTA. RTA's entire business model right now is derived from having more cars on the road, right? The more roads they build, the more cars are on the road, the more salad gets paid, right? All these sorts of things. But their strategic vision is less cars on the road, less congestion, less fatalities, less pollution. So how do you transition through this Kodak moment unless you introduce it yourself? So our proposition is, which helps us scale these exercises, is, well, you set these challenges, and then you bring the best companies from around the world who are doing this work to sit with you in the same space for 9 weeks and just develop proposals together, develop pilot project proposals together. And we have our 4th cohort going on right now. I would urge you all to come down to Emirates Towers and have a look. It's quite exciting. There's a lot of people doing very weird and interesting things there. And out of this, about 80% of the companies that come through actually get an MOU. And again, like what happened with 3D printing, I can't tell you how many conversations I have. It's hard for me to walk around Emirates Towers because people constantly are jumping on you, being like, hey, thanks so much. Like, I've been an entrepreneur in blockchain for 5 years, and I've never found somebody who actually understands what we're doing. I've been an entrepreneur in AI for medicine for 3 years, and no one's willing to take me seriously. So you're giving people the opportunity to fulfill their passions in a way which matter and change the world, and isn't just about like another Facebook app, right? We're then doing this with private sector, so creating all of Emirates Towers, turning this into this co-working space with Bjarke Ingels. You might have heard of this project too, around Dubai 10X. So we're working with 36 different government departments to train transformation teams within each entity to start to do this work on their own, independent. What I like about this project, 10X is a term which comes out of Silicon Valley. It's an order of magnitude increase in speed or creativity or effectiveness. And you have this phrase, which is kind of cocky, but like you have this phrase of people like, I'm a 10X programmer. I do more work than 10 other people, right? So think about how can you create the kinds of culture within the regulators here in Dubai, who in many cases are also the biggest customers for these transformational technologies, where they're saying, okay, great, that thing that you brought me that you can just buy off the shelf that we've been buying for the last 10 years, not good enough. It actually needs to do this totally weird thing, which is indicative of the vision that we're going forward on. And what's been extraordinary about this is having done this now for, this is the 2nd cycle that we're in, we have 36 amazing teams across government who are hard for us to keep up with. Right? We've lit the fire with them, and then we're enabling them, and they're going out there and coming back to us with challenges. We had a workshop the other day where they're talking about like creating free zones in space for people to register companies which are not yet registerable in existing jurisdictions, right? Like huge genetic databases across the whole city. Just amazingly interesting stuff. And these are coming from the very same people that 5 years ago would never have been able to have permission to do this kind of things. So I want to leave you with this quote, right? This idea that as you're pursuing your research, as you're pursuing your careers, as you're pursuing your strategic plans for government entities, the only way, and in my opinion, the most exciting way to help to create the future is to focus on this sort of pirate-based approach. I call this pre-legal innovation. It is things that are maybe technically illegal, but only because they're not legal yet. And the process by which you get permission for creating these inspiring visions of how things could change follows exactly the process that I just described. right? It's dead simple to create an inspiring video right now. It's dead simple to create a tangible object of a fake project or prototype and then tell the story of what the benefits might be. And it's really actually pretty simple then to get millions of people interested in your idea and then use those millions of people to inspire leaders or investors to say, yeah, I'll give this thing a shot, and just take that step by step by step. So you start from this vision about what you think is possible, abracadabra, with my words I make it. It's kind of magic. And from that you build, and you build, and you build, until suddenly what started as something that was illegal and laughed at now becomes national policy. So I'll just leave you here on my favorite quote. It's Kipling, "Dream no small dreams, for they have not the power to stir men's or women's souls." There are very few places in the world right now which has this rare combination of money, vision, speed, and talent, like Dubai and the UAE, where you'll be able to actually trial these kinds of big projects, which will become the infrastructure of the future, which will become the industries of the future, which will become the social norms of the future. I've shared a bunch of technology projects for you, but the most exciting stuff here is about how we actually relate to each other differently as men and women, as bosses and employees, as citizens in government. All of this stuff is transforming at an extraordinary rate. And it's extremely exciting, and it gives us the chance to actually reimagine what we want for ourselves and for the world, and then do something about it. So I've worked all over the world. It's not happening anywhere else at the scale that it's happening here, so take advantage of this. Because if you don't, like they say on the, well, never mind, I'm not going to quote an internet meme, but it will take advantage of you. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Hopefully this is of use for you guys. That's my email address. Just warn you right now, I don't respond to it, but someone will. If you send any ideas to that, our job is to help come up with creative ideas with you in partnership and then find people who can actually implement those. So feel free to email me. You're going to get a long auto response, which basically says, thank you very much, I'm not going to respond to you. But it will get forwarded to the right person, and someone will get back to you. So thanks so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.